Okay, well, I would like to welcome everybody here to the Fort Douglas Military Museum, both in person. We have a small group today here, and then all of you joining us virtually online. We are the state's officially recognized military museum. We cover all branches of the military and all different eras of military history here in the state of Utah. We preserve, honor, do exhibits, education, outreach for all of these different topics. So today we're actually welcoming you guys to the Sisters in Service Women's Lecture Series. We're doing these once every week, so every Saturday here till the end of the month, total of 4. And what we're doing here is honoring a Women's History Month here. So we have quite a women's collection here at the museum. We're actually re-indexing it and getting ready to reconstruct some new exhibits. We would just like to let everybody know here that we are continuing to build that collection. So if you know of anybody that would like to be interviewed, anybody that would like to donate artifacts, both serving here stateside, abroad, also home front efforts over military history, that would be great to get in contact with us. So just to go through specifically our partners here. So we're the Fort Douglas Military Museum. We fall under the Utah National Guard as a state agency. We have a partnership with a nonprofit, the Fort Douglas Military Museum Association. And this lecture series is also in partnership with the Utah Department of Veterans and Military Affairs, Valor, a Forge Forward publication, the Women's Clinic at the Salt Lake City VA, Utah Honor Flight. I think we've got everybody. Is that all of our partners? Okay, we've got a good partnership going on here. So again, I'm Bo Burgess. I'm the Director Curator here at Fort Douglas Military Museum. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to turn the time over to Michelle Bridges here to introduce our speaker and a little bit about how this lecture series came together. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Michelle Bridges. I'm the coordinator for special events here at the museum, and we did a series in 2019, and then COVID kind of interrupted us. So we thought this year that we would reintroduce our women's speaker series for Women's History Month. And we have 4 exciting dynamic speakers over the course of the next month. But today we have Stephanie Harmon, who is the president of the Utah Honor Flight. I met Stephanie because I was actually lucky enough to go on the all-women's honor flight in 2019. And what an experience, highlight of my life. I met some amazing women. Most of them were from the Vietnam era nurses. But it really kind of got me thinking about the women in military service. You don't hear their stories very often. They were caregivers, they came home, they became caregivers again. So you don't really know the women who actually had boots on the ground, who in the jungles of Vietnam or on the battlefields of World War II, and even those that served in Korea and those that served before World War II. Their stories just are not told often. So I've been actively searching for those stories and actively searching for the artifacts that proved that their stories were actually there. So to go on the honor flight with the Vietnam era nurses, I was very impressed with the people who ran the honor flight. On that all women's honor flight, all of our staff members were women as well. So there was about 56, I believe, women between the veterans and their guardians and the staff members that went. And it was amazing to see the camaraderie and the bonds that were created between these women. And there wasn't a lot of, little cat fights or nicky picky things at all. They just were true and honest with each other and just how they had each other's back. It was a great trip. So I reached out to Stephanie to have her teach us or talk to us about volunteering, not just with the honor flight, but other opportunities, because she herself was raised to give back to the community. That's what her family does. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Stephanie, and she can tell us about honor flight and about herself. Stephanie.
Hi, So like Michelle said, my name is Stephanie Harmon, and I am the director of Utah Honor Flight. Women in History Month is a time to reflect the courage of women in past generations and to celebrate how their efforts and bravery afford women the opportunities and freedom we have today. When Michelle asked me to talk about my volunteer service, I was a little caught off guard. I have always grown up just volunteering. That's what my family does. And from a very young age, I was with my mom, my dad, and my family. We volunteered and we served others, whether it was in church, community service, or just finding people that needed help. We were always there trying to find someone that we could help serve. I've also been on the receiving end, which sometimes isn't very easy to have others serve you, but it's also important. So with that, I want to give you a little bit of background of my family so that you can understand why service is so important to me. I was lucky enough to be born when I knew all 8 of my great-grandparents and 3 of my grandparents. My great-grandpa Popa immigrated from Romania at the age of 17 in 1912 on the George Washington. My great-grandpa Sessions and my great-grandpa Brinkhurst both served in World War I, great-grandpas. And my great-grandpa Lemon was a security guard at an Air Force testing site. My grandpa Lemon served in World War II as a naval medic, and my grandpa Sessions served aboard a naval carrier in the Pacific as a radio operator. And after the war, he was a volunteer firefighter for 50 years. Alongside every one of my grandpas were my amazing grandmothers. My great-grandma Popa cooked and fed the railroad workers at the train station by their house up in Idaho. My grandma Sessions worked in her family business and had the most amazing rose garden that I ever remember seeing. My great-grandma Brinkhurst worked on her family farm, and I remember her packing pears and apples from the orchard that they had in their house or in their gardens down in St. George. My great-grandma Lemon served in her church, and I remember every one of them always being there for their family, no matter how busy they were. My grandma Jane worked at Hill Air Force Base repairing engines on the bombers in support of the war effort during World War II. She served a mission and she got her pilot's license, all while raising 2 boys as a single mom. And my grandma Sessions began working at the age of 16 at the naval base now known as Freeport Center, packing and unpacking boxcars with supplies. She also worked at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. My grandmas were Rosie the Riveters to me. They both married their sweethearts during World War II and supported them as they were off to war, and also worked at Hill Air Force Base themselves. My 95-year-old grandma is here with me today with my mom, and they are both amazing women in my life. My grandma just quit working 2 years ago at the age of 93 when COVID shut down the Jazz games. And she was an usher there and was loved by all of the players and the coaches. So we have some pretty cool stories about things that she's got to do and see there. My dad was in the Army and was in the Special Forces during Vietnam, and he was also a police officer before he took a job at Hill Air Force Base. My mom worked at Hill Air Force Base, and most of her time she spent at the 388 Fighter Wing as a protocol officer. Her love for the military is what she chose to volunteer with and find things and opportunities after her retirement. In 2006, she saw on the news about a guy who wanted to take a group of World War II veterans back to Washington, D.C. to see their memorials. And she called and asked if there was any way that she could get my grandpa on that flight. And she was able to help that flight as well as 2 others, and to take my grandpa back on that first flight from Utah. And then in 2008, she started up what was called the National Honor Flight. And she served there 3 years as a public relations officer, and then resigned so that she could become part of Utah Honor Flight. She did that for 6 years, and that's where I found my love of Utah Honor Flight. Other family members that I have serve as search and rescue. We have police officers, dispatchers, nurses, firefighters, and veterans. So you can see that my family lives and breathes service. When my brother was 5 years old, ooh, he was in an accident and lost his eye. And years later, my mom and dad found out about a group in California that would let you raise guide dogs. And so we raised 2 guide dogs for the blind. And it was such an amazing organization, but it was probably one of the hardest things when we had to give those dang dogs up and let them go to families so that they would be able to have that opportunity to have those guide dogs. But it was so amazing for our family to be a part of that. Whew, I'll make it through all this. Cancer took 2 of our family members from us. My Aunt Karen in 2007 and my Uncle Greg in 2008. And in 2010, my cousin Sasha, my Aunt Karen's daughter, called and said, hey, there's this really cool 3-day walk out in California. And she had done it the year before, and she said, do you want to come and do this walk with me? And I said, heck yeah, that sounds so much fun. Let's go out to San Diego and hang out for the weekend. And that was probably the time that I learned that you should always ask what's involved before volunteering for something. Not only did we each have to raise $2,300, pay for our own airfare and our hotel that we were there, but we had to walk 60 miles over the course of 3 days. So it was a 20-mile walk each day. And that gave us a lot of time to reflect on the things that had happened to our family, to meet other people who were fighting cancer, and just have an amazing time. To date, I have done 10 of those 3-day walks. So I personally have raised over $23,000 for cancer research. And with COVID, we weren't able to walk the last couple of years, but I just signed up for my 11th 3-day walk this year. During the 2002 Winter Olympics that were in Salt Lake, I was able to volunteer with my mom, my grandma, my grandpa, 2 of my aunts, and my uncle, and we were all volunteers at the opening and closing ceremonies, ushering the Olympians back and forth between the events, and it was an amazing time as our country was still healing from the attack on 9/11. My cousin Suzanne's daughter was born with Mobius Syndrome, which is a rare condition that affects facial nerves, eye movements, and facial expressions. And she was born with severe lung issues and was on a ventilator her entire life. So each year, my cousin would have a fundraiser on her daughter's birthday, and they would raise money for Primary Children's Hospital. And it was so amazing to see Aaliyah every year on her birthday. She was so excited to have this fundraiser. And now my family participates in fundraisers for Mascot Miracles and for Primary Children's every year in memory of Aaliyah, who passed away in 2018 at the age of 18. In September of 2014, my mom needed some help on an honor flight, and she asked me if I wanted to go. And of course, I jumped at the chance because a few years before that, my son had had the opportunity to go on a flight with her. And when he came home, I asked him how his trip was, and he told me that he had met a man who was friends with Ira Hayes, the man who is pictured in the statue at the Battle of Iwo Jima. And this gentleman that he had met was also there when the flag was raised. And I was in shock. I couldn't believe that my son had actually met people who you only read about in history books. And so I was able to go on that trip with my mom, and my grandma was able to be there. Her brother was there. My 2 cousins were there with their grandpas as well. And after that time, I was hooked with Utah Honor Flight. A year later, a board position opened up, and I was able to join the board of Utah Honor Flight. So Honor Flight is an organization that takes veterans back to Washington, D.C. to see their memorials and to give our veterans thank you that most of them have never deserved or received. And all of them definitely deserve I've had the opportunity to go on 15 missions, and I've met almost 800 veterans during that time with honor flight. I've been asked so many times which is my favorite flight, and it's kind of like asking which is your favorite kid. Even if you have a favorite one, you don't tell anybody. But for obvious reasons, my favorite flight was the one my dad and my uncle got to go on. So my brother and my cousin were able to be their guardians, and I was able to go as a staff member. I got with my mom and I took the burial flag from my grandpa, who I was the only one that I had never met, my dad's dad. And I took that with me and didn't tell my dad and my uncle until we got to the World War II memorial. And I presented the flag to them at that time, and they were able to kind of honor their dad a little bit during that time. And then I took the flag with me for the rest of the trip. And I was able to pay my respects to him for the service that he gave to our country. When I go on the honor flights, I have a pin that has my mom and my dad and sets of my grandparents. And it's all of their pictures while my dad and my grandpas were in their military uniforms. And I wear that on all of our honor flights so that I can remember how blessed I am. Honor Flight was one of the few hubs nationally that was able to take an all-women's flight. And during the decision-making process of that flight, we decided that we truly wanted that to be all women. And so, like Michelle said, our staff, all of our guardians were women. And most of the veterans, or most of the guardians that came on that flight were from the Utah National Guard. And so it was amazing to see the young women with our Vietnam veterans and the bonding that took place during that flight. A few days before the flight, I got an email that I wanted to read from one of the veterans, and she said, "Stephanie, I have a question. If I have room in my carry-on, can I bring a stuffed bear with me? Years ago, I put it on the traveling wall for someone very dear to me. They told me that it would be sent to Washington and placed in a building that held everything special that was saved from the wall in Washington. It ended up in a closet at a local VFW where it sat for 2 years until I brought it home. I would like to take it and place it at the wall under Andy's name. It might not fit in my carry-on. This is so stupid, but when I brought it out today, I started crying. He was so special to me. He taught me how to fish. He was always there smiling. He lived a block from me. What happened to him wasn't fair. He was in the Navy and did his whole tour. His family was getting ready for a big welcome home party. He was in Da Nang, and they told him if he wanted to go home a couple of days early, there was a flight to Saigon and he could get out that night. His plane was shot down and he didn't make it home. So I carried that bear for her to Washington, D.C. And I stood with her as she placed it under Andy's name. And now we both know that it's in that place where all of the replicas, or all of the things that are left at the Vietnam Wall is in Washington now. I've been able to listen to amazing stories of those women that served during Vietnam and Korea on that flight, and knowing that they came home and went on to be judges and nurses and mothers and teachers and to serve their family and their communities in our state is amazing. And I've been able to keep in touch with probably every single one of them. The women's flight was an amazing flight to be a part of. I had the opportunity to sit at Iwo Jima and listen to the story of a man named Lloyd, who was a Marine from Cache Valley. And as we sat there, he was looking up at the memorial of Iwo Jima, and he told me the story of how him and his brother had landed on Iwo Jima, which was one of the bloodiest battles that the Marines had fought. And Lloyd was fighting alongside of his brother when a bomb hit. And he said that that was the first time that he knew that he couldn't hear his brother's thoughts. And he looked around and he found his brother's helmet. And then he went and gathered up his brother's remains and buried him in a shallow grave and went back to fighting. And I remember sitting there thinking, he was 17 when this happened, which is the age of most of my boys were around that age. And I just couldn't imagine my boys having to do that for one of their brothers. And I kept in touch with Lloyd until he passed away just a few years ago. On another flight, there was a veteran, Carl, who was hospitalized. He was too sick. Thank you. He got sick on the flight and had to be hospitalized. And so we always have someone assigned at an honor flight to stay behind if there is that situation. And I was the one who was staying behind that time. And so that night I went to bed. I figured the next morning I would get up with his son-in-law and we would go to the hospital and get Carl and be on our way back home, but that wasn't the case. Carl's blood sugars were dangerously low. And no matter what the nurses tried to feed him, he refused to eat. He kept telling us that all he wanted to do was go back to Arlington. He wanted to go back to Arlington and lay down with the men who were brave heroes that he had fought alongside. And so I remember calling my mom and just crying. And she said, just get over your crying and then you need to go back into the room and do what needs to be done. And so it took a little while. We went back into the room and we talked to the nurses and we knew that there was a good chance that Carl would not be coming home for quite a while. So I called my mom and she drove up to look to see Carl's wife, and we would let the two of them FaceTime, which was so cute because neither one of them really understood what FaceTime was and they couldn't figure out how they were seeing each other in real time. And so they would tap the screen and, and it was cute, but that still didn't perk Carl up. And so one night I was sitting in the hospital with Carl and I said, Carl, if you could have anything in the world to eat right now, what would you eat? And he said, Pop-Tarts and sweet tea. And so I called the nurse and I said, you need to get Carl some Pop-Tarts and some sweet tea. And she said, he's a diabetic. That's going to be dangerous because it could spike his sugars up really high. And so I went down to the CVS and I got Carl some Pop-Tarts and some sweet tea and I brought him back up to his room and we gave those to him. And the next morning Carl was up and eating breakfast and lunch, and the next day he was discharged and we flew home to Salt Lake. And my mom had arranged a welcome home for Carl. He was the only veteran that was coming home from that flight. And the Utah Patriot Guard and a bunch of volunteers from Honor Flight all met us at midnight to welcome Carl home. And that was one of the most special welcome homes because Carl got that all to himself. Honor Flight's a program that I will never be able to pay back as much as what's been given to me by our veterans. I owe everything I am and everything that I have to the men and women who fight for our freedoms daily. My kids and I carry cards with us everywhere we go. On the front, it says, the land of the free because of the brave. Thank you for your service. And on the back of the card, it says, I am just one among many who salute you and thank you for your service. You are truly a great American hero. Thank you for all you have done to secure my freedom from a grateful American. Sometimes it's hard to go up and just reach out to a stranger and say thank you. But these cards have made it easy for my kids to walk up to complete strangers and veterans or police officers, firefighters, anybody that they think deserves that thank you and hand that to them. And it's been something that they enjoy doing. 2.5 years ago, my grandson Hayes started having seizures and was diagnosed with epilepsy. My daughter-in-law Madison has organized car washes and has done a tree for the Festival of Trees to raise money for Primary Children's Hospital. And every year she sends out information to his school so that they can teach the kids about epilepsy awareness in the month of November. In December of 2019, me and my husband, my niece, and my nephew, and several other volunteers from Honor Flight were able to participate in Wreaths Across America at Arlington Cemetery. I've done this in Layton a couple of times, but being there in Arlington was super special. It's somewhere that we always go every Honor Flight, and so to be able to walk out onto those graves and place the wreath and say the names of the veterans that were laid to rest there was an amazing experience for all of us. When COVID shut things down, it was so hard because Honor Flight, we couldn't fly our 3-day walk, we couldn't go participate in. and I was lost. That was the time that I realized how much service meant to me and how much service brought joy into my life. This past December, I was able to go to Hawaii for the anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which is a place that is so special in my heart. My grandparents lived in Hawaii, and my grandma was worked at Hickam Air Force Base for several years when I was growing up. And when I turned 19 and graduated from college, I was able to go spend about 6 weeks with them. And I remember sitting out on a night every morning. My grandma would get up and go to work, and me and my grandpa would sit out there, and their house overlooked Pearl Harbor. And this past December was also 10 years since he had passed away. He passed away December 7th as well. So that date and being in Hawaii was very special to me. I took cards that I had with the saying on it, and I met a veteran who had served in World War II in Korea and in Vietnam. He was a tri-war vet. And I met him at the Arizona Memorial, and I gave him one of the cards, and I told him, "Thank you for your service." He reached out and he hugged me, and he said, "Darling, you are worth it." And that's probably the first time that I've ever had a veteran say that to me, and it hit really hard. I've always said that I want to be an American that was worth the sacrifice, and at that moment I felt like I was. I remember when I was growing up and raising my kids, I always watched my mom and other members of our family doing volunteer work, and I couldn't wait until the day that I had more free time. I was so busy raising my kids and volunteering at PTA meetings and driving carpools and coaching soccer and taking care of my niece and nephew after school, being a homeroom mom for 4 kids. And it took me a long time to realize that I was serving. I've been introduced to so many amazing volunteer groups in Utah through my service with Honor Flight, our Utah Patriot Guard Riders, the Battling Betties, Follow the Flag, Honor 365, Operation Hero, Dock and Gunnies, and Robin's Tool Band, just to name a few. There are so many opportunities in Utah for us to serve. And I think the most important thing is to find something that you're passionate about and then find a way to serve in that capacity. I have been so honored to meet so many veterans through my service with Honor Flight. I have met men who stormed the beaches of Normandy, a man who dropped candy over Berlin, one who carried letters for General Patton, one who survived the attack of the USS Arizona, another who rescued veterans from the Chosin River, lone survivors of their units, and prisoners of the Vietnam War held in the Hanoi Hilton. And one veteran that stands out in my mind, a World War II veteran, who when I asked him what he did in service, he said, "I was just a cook." I always wondered how many veterans coming back from battle were not thankful for that cook. So I wanted to thank you, Michelle, and everyone for giving me this opportunity to speak on service during Women's History Month. And just remember, sometimes service isn't always about being knee deep in the battlefield. Sometimes it's just as important to be a cook.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now if I can get mine as well. I've met some of those veterans that you've met. I've met some of those the volunteers that you've met. I've worked with some of the organizations that you've mentioned. But I just wanted to say thank you. You're an inspiration to a lot of people that you may not realize just how much we feel, and thank you for what you do for us. I wanted to take a moment to introduce Corey Pearson from the Department of Veterans and Military Affairs. He's going to say a couple of words about what they do.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate the opportunity to talk just briefly, especially after Stephanie sharing her experiences. helping our veterans, helping our female veterans here in the state of Utah, go back and see the monuments, the history, and all of the wonders that we have still to learn, even though some of us have served. I just want to echo what Michelle said. We are here during the month of March to honor our women, and especially to honor our women veterans. Many of you know that as of 2021, 15% of our active duty force are women that raise their hands and say, I will go and serve my great country. 18% of women are in the Utah National Guard and Reserve serving their country. And so we owe a debt of gratitude to everyone that raised their right hands, but especially this month to honor our women veterans and say thank you. Thank you for your service. But also to say, now that you have served, are you connected to benefits due to your service? I would just like to say, if you don't know, or if you want to learn more about healthcare, education, individual state benefits, property tax abatement, the Utah State Parks Tax, going back to school, veterans tuition gap that helps if you run out of your federal dollars as you're going to school. The state of Utah is here to help you and want to see you succeed and want to say thank you for your service through all these benefits that we have. So again, if you have questions or if you think there's a need, please reach out to us. www.veterans.utah.gov. You can call us 801-326-2372, and we'd be happy to help you and happy to connect you with benefits. So again, it's my honor to be here, and I'm grateful for the partnership that we do have with Fort Douglas, the Utah National Guard, our department, the VA Healthcare, Benefits Administration, and our Women's Steering Committee that has worked so hard with Michelle and Bo here at Fort Douglas to put these speaking events together. So again, thank you. And Stephanie, thank you. I have something for you that I would like to give you. So if you'll come on up. And then I think, Michelle, if you want to grab those back over there, we can give her those too. But we have our department coin. And I would like to say thank you and continue on your mission with Honor Flight. I hope maybe you'll have some more flights just for women veterans to go back and share their stories and share the experiences. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And of course, that's one for you. And then on behalf of the Women's Steering Committee, we would like to give you this card and a basket with some mugs, and that is for you. And then also, we may give you this flower. And thank you. We really would appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
So with that being said, we'd like to thank everyone for coming to our speaker series today. And we look forward to our next 3 that we have throughout the month of March. And we'll see you next weekend, Saturday, same time, same place. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.